In this screencast, we're going to look at the folio and what is actually required to hand up. So it's a submission tick list. First thing you need to be aware of is that you need to actually have a title page. It's quite funny how many people forget to do this, and it's part of the criteria in communication. So make sure you have a title page that's got your name, your SACE number on it would be really handy, and maybe even a picture if it adds to what you're trying to show. The contents page is really important. It may be best to leave this to the last possible minute, but you have to have a contents page there. And you can use the function within Google, if you need to, inside Google Docs, which will build a contents page for you. You just have to use the headings when you do the formatting there, and we can go run through this in class. But once you've done that, all you do is just go make a contents page, and it does it for you, and that's all you need to do. Okay, don't have to worry about page numbers or those kind of things, because the contents that will be made inside Google just hyperlink you to the section within your page, within your document, which is what you want. Right, the first thing is an introduction. Now the introduction doesn't have to be large and huge, but it's got to actually set up the folio for the reader. You've got to assume the person that is reading this folio has no idea about it. So it's got to be really clear and concise, and lets the person know what the problem is you're trying to solve, and maybe some hints about how you're going to do it. Not a whole list of processes, but just maybe some hints. You need to give an overview of what you're being investigated. Make sure you cover what's in the question sheet. Okay, make sure that you understand what you're trying to find, but then also write it in your own words. Indicate if you're going to investigate any more aspects. So if you're going to go a bit further than the basics, you maybe want to indicate that in there. And then also summarize how you think you're going to present them. So you might be presenting your findings in a written format, plus tables and graphs where appropriate. So the person knows, oh, I'm going to be looking for this when I'm going to mark it. Okay, really clever. And it's really, you're probably looking at half a page, 3/4 of a page for this. Not much more, but so if you go longer than that, then you're starting to be a bit waffly. Okay, so be prepared to that. The next section is your calculations or your method or your process. Please don't say this is what I'm going to do and then do it. This is what I'm going to do, then do it, or explain all the mathematics in there. Like I'm going to find the consideration by timesing the number of shares by the share price, because it's obvious in your spreadsheets what you're doing. You don't actually have to spell it out like that. If you're doing something tricky with dividend imputation or taxation credits or something like that, that may need a bit of explanation to the mathematics, by all means put it in there, but the routine things I wouldn't even worry about. So the minimum things that you need to have in this section is your buying and selling of shares over a period of time, which we've talked about in class, working out whether you've made any capital gains or capital losses, then also working out any tax payable. Alrighty, and then from that you can work out your after-tax return, which is really important because that's the big thing, how much money to actually get back after your tax has been paid. You also want to talk about the market trends that have happened over this time. So that might be things like the share market has risen greatly, that's why I've made so much money, or you can see it's dropping up and down and that's why I'm in a bit of a pickle. So you'll be able to see that by you looking at maybe the All Ordinaries Index over the same time frames that you've been buying your shares for. So if you've got your shares for 5 years, you might want to look at the All Ords over that 5-year period and discuss that as well. Okay, you also might want to use a spreadsheet for easy repetitive calculations. So the things that you're doing over and over again, which is buying and selling, because you're doing that multiple times, just use a spreadsheet. Okay, don't do it by hand because it's just a waste of time. Because once you've set a spreadsheet up once, you can do this really quickly. Now, presenting information, you can summarize your findings in a table. I like using a table. Tables are clear. So you might have the name of your shares, your time frame, and the amount of profit you've made, or your capital gains that you've made. Really important to have that there, because then the person doesn't have to go through a whole lot of spreadsheets to find their information. They can grab it from a table. Really clear, really concise, and really easy to analyze. If you can use graphs, this is really handy as too. Graphs will help you show a whole lot of information visually. If you can do that, and it adds to what you're trying to discuss and find, then use it. It's the best way to go, because otherwise you might end up finding that you actually don't really, if you have a graph that doesn't show much, it's just a waste of time. But if you've got a graph that can show really good information and really clearly, it's easier than having a whole lot of words there. Okay, so that's the basic kind of stuff. Then the other possibilities that we talked about in class is, what can you do to maximize your profit? So you might do a moving average graph or a share indice graph, and you might say, well, this is pretty cool. We'll go down that pathway and we'll have a look at working at that and working at that. That could be a really good way of working out when to buy and sell shares. It could be you're predicting the market and things. Dividends are really important because they give you an income stream, and you can talk about how they work, and you can have imputation credits and all those kind of things which add to the complexity of what you're doing. Okay, You also might want to discuss the effect of inflation. And the inflation is really important because if your shares have gone up by 10%, inflation's gone up 40%, you actually haven't made money. So the way you're going to do that, it's going to be new, take old over old times by 100, and you can look at your share prices over time or your portfolio prices over time and compare it to your CPI or the inflation over time, which you'll be able to find by researching. Yield, does the yield actually help you make good decisions? And you can work that out either being the approximate or the exact yield because you've got all the values sitting inside your spreadsheets anyway, so it's just another line there, and it'll only work if you get dividends. Okay, so they all kind of link together, and then you might come up with some other investment strategies as well. Okay, so you might have found that by using your moving average graph and the All Ordinaries Index and using a break-even line in your graph, you might be able to find out a better way to make money. Okay, so it might be, you've got a whole lot of ways you can do it, but that's the extension stuff that you should only do once you've got the other stuff nailed. When you come down to the final bit, which is the analysis, this is where you actually pull all the math together and explain to the reader what you have discovered. It's really important that you kind of draw it in and keep it really quite concise. So you've got to mention what the calculations actually show and what they are doing. So if you do got like I said before, if you've got an imputation credit, and discuss what's happening with the mathematics there. So the bit that goes to the tax department, why you get a tax return or a reduced tax rate depending on your marginal tax rate. You need to discuss that in this bit here. And also you want to mention what you have found in terms of answering the initial question. So you might find that either Sid or Manny is correct. You might find just buying long-term over 10 years is the best thing to do. Just buy them and just hang on to them and don't worry about anything else. Or you might have found another way where you can actually maximize your gains, even if the share market is a bit dodgy, like it's a falling market, how you can make some money on that as well. So that's really important. This analysis bit will take you a bit of time to bring it together and be really concise. The other thing that people tend to forget a little bit is assumptions and limitations. This is really important. This is one of the key bits of in the A band, is where you actually talk about the things that you've put into the folio that you're just assuming it's going to work and how they actually limit your findings. So things like, for instance, you're using a tax rate of 42%. Now, that's been given to you in a task, or you're assuming that you've got a tax rate of 42%. If your tax rate was lower, then you'd make more capital gains. So that's the effect of that assumption. Okay, if you had your tax rate was higher than 42%, therefore you'd pay more tax, therefore your after-tax return will be lower, so you wouldn't make as much money. You're also talking about the fact that you can buy shares retrospectively, which means that you can actually have hindsight of traveling back in time and seeing what the share prices are back before you started. That's cool. You might want to mention that in real life you probably haven't got that. You probably have that snapshot of that day and the history, and that may help you make decisions. So that's a good thing to do. Also, you might want to talk about the brokerage charges. We in class we've used 2%. You might be using 6 or 8% in this. Discuss why and the effect that this is going to have on your final findings. Okay, so you also might find a flat fee broker might be far better to do because they just give you a flat fee, and that might be a better way of doing it. And you might want to demonstrate that as well. So that's another thing you can talk about. Now, in the conclusion, this is where you're drawing it all together. You're bringing everything back in. You mentioned if you're able to show if you can make money on the share market. That's really important. You know, what have you been able to show and why? Discuss which method worked better and why it worked better. So the long term might work better just because of the fact that it takes into account that the share market goes up and down. You might want to discuss taxation implications, especially income streams. And if you've got graphs and things like that can show that, like a moving average graph, how you use that to make money, and did that actually help? And then your final concluding statement actually has to tell who is right in terms of this project. Who was the one that made the right call at the beginning? Was buying shares at any time and just hanging on to them make sense? Or is it just buying really good shares that make sense? Or can you predict the market a little bit by using a moving average graph and a few other things? So really that last bit is just drawing it together. So remember, your analysis is probably a bit more detailed. Your conclusion is probably a bit shorter. Now, if you've got big spreadsheets and things like that, you can whack them into the appendices, but I would just use a hyperlink out. So in your appendices, put a hyperlink out to your spreadsheets, but I'd also use screenshots of certain spreadsheets to be able to just talk to the person reading it. This is what I've done, so they can actually see what you've done in a screenshot, so they don't have to jump out of that document and go and have a look and come back in again. So screenshots will work very well. Just use the screen clipping tool and you'll be fine. You can just throw it in there and it will look fine. those big long spreadsheets, don't print them out and don't include them in your folio, because you don't need that. A hyperlink will do it. Okay, and please use the doc that's in your Google Drive, because that's the one that the teacher can access, and can give you feedback as you go. So all you have to do is ping them like we showed you in class, use their plus and their email address in a comment bar. They'll get an email saying that someone's left a comment for them, and they can go and have a look. So it's really important that you use that doc from your Google folder that you have in your Google Drive, and that'll help you get feedback really quickly, and also means that your teacher can help you. So I hope this kind of helps you how to set out a folio task. There'll be some examples we can look at in class as well, but it's really important that you kind of set it out and follow it logically, and don't miss one of those tick boxes, because otherwise you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot.